A mountain of stone still stands after 4,000 years. Its existence defies simple explanation. We know the pyramids were built without modern technology, without steel, without engines. So how was it truly done? The secret does not lie in forgotten machines, but in a hidden world of unspoken rules. By the end of this video, you will understand the 25 silent codes that transformed thousands of individuals into a single, unstoppable force. We will uncover the sacred promises between masons, the silent signals on the ramps, and the profound loyalty that turned impossible engineering into reality. What does it take for a community to build for eternity? 4,000 years ago, the Nile's annual flood transformed the landscape. For 3 months, farmland vanished under a vast, fertile lake. This was not a time of idleness. It was a season of national purpose. The same farmers who planted crops along the riverbanks were now mobilized by the state. They became the muscle of the gods, the builders of eternity. This was the old kingdom of Egypt, a civilization operating on a scale we can barely comprehend. The popular image of toiling slaves is a myth shattered by archaeology. Excavations at Giza reveal entire towns built for the builders, complete with bakeries producing thousands of loaves, medical facilities setting broken bones, and carefully rationed supplies of fish and beer. This was not a prison camp. It was a highly organized, state-sponsored project on an industrial scale. The workers were fed, housed, and cared for because their labor was the nation's greatest asset. This context of a structured, almost corporate society is the fertile ground where our first unspoken codes took root. The sheer logistics of housing and feeding thousands of people while they undertook the most ambitious construction project in history required a level of social organization that boggles the mind. So, how did they translate this organization from the workers' village to the building site? The first code emerged from the very stone itself, a principle of precision that began long before a single block was set in place. Every stone had to meet its neighbor perfectly. This was the second unspoken code, the Pact of the Seamless Joint. Imagine the challenge. You are handling a block of limestone weighing more than 2 elephants. It cannot simply be dropped into place. It must be lowered with such care that the gap between it and the adjoining stone is thinner than a blade of grass. How was this humanly possible? The secret was not in the lifting, but in the preparation. Before a block ever left the quarry, its mating surfaces were dressed with incredible care. Craftsmen used harder stones like dolerite to pound and grind the surfaces until they were nearly flat. But the true genius was in the final step. They used a slurry of water and fine sand as a natural polishing compound. By rubbing one stone against another with this abrasive mix between them, they achieved a contact so close it required no mortar. The fit was mechanical, a friction lock of incredible strength. This was more than a technique, it was a philosophy. A poorly fitted stone was a point of weakness, a betrayal of the entire structure. The builder who set that stone would feel the silent judgment of his peers, not because he was punished, but because he had broken the pact. His imperfect work would endure for thousands of years, a permanent mark of his failure. This relentless pursuit of perfection in the unseen joints created a monolith that could withstand earthquakes and the slow, crushing weight of time. But achieving this perfect fit demanded an even deeper level of coordination, a language without words that echoed across the rising ramps. This perfection was a matter of physics, not just pride. The covenant of the seamless joint was a sacred understanding that the fit between limestone blocks must be so perfect, not even a razor blade could slip between them. This was not merely for aesthetic perfection, but for survival. Each block carried the accumulated weight of every stone above it. An uneven joint would create a point of concentrated stress, a tiny fault line that could, over centuries, crack and shift under the unimaginable pressure. To prevent this, the weight had to be distributed perfectly, flowing down through the pyramid like water through a sieve, evenly across every single surface. The stonemasons developed an almost intimate knowledge of the stone's grain and properties. They learned to read the limestone like a map, understanding its hidden weaknesses and strengths. With copper chisels and heavy dolerite pounders, they worked the surface not with brutal force, but with a patient, repetitive rhythm. They were not just shaping rock, they were convincing it to become part of something greater. The final test was not a visual inspection, but an auditory one. The sound of a properly seated block was a solid, resonant thud that echoed faintly in the air. It was the audible confirmation of the covenant being honored, a sound that meant the structure was one step closer to eternity. This meticulous attention to detail at the micro level, the world of a single joint, was perfectly mirrored by a grand, macro-level understanding of the entire site. This silent language of sound and precision found its purest form miles away at the source. In the vast limestone quarries, a separate world of unspoken communication thrived. This was the third code, the silent language of the quarry. Here, experienced quarrymen did not just cut stone, they listened to it. They could read the rock face like a page, their eyes and ears attuned to subtle clues invisible to the untrained. A slight variation in color, a faint ripple in the texture, a specific hollow sound when the stone was tapped with a small hammer, these were all words in a silent vocabulary. This language prevented catastrophic waste. A single misread flaw could cause a multi-ton block to fracture irreparably after days of labor, setting the entire operation back. The most critical communication was a specific series of hammer taps. A sharp, staccato rhythm might signal where to place the next set of wooden wedges. A slower, resonant tap could mean to stop to reassess the angle. Another pattern would instruct the team exactly when and how to begin levering, coordinating the efforts of a dozen men with nothing but sound. This ensured that every block was oriented correctly from the moment of its birth, its future position in the pyramid already decided. The grain of the stone had to run in the right direction for maximum strength, and its bottom face needed to be the flattest for its journey. The successful extraction of a perfect block was a quiet triumph, a testament to this wordless understanding. But that block now faced the most perilous part of its life, a carefully choreographed journey from the quarry floor to the rising pyramid, where an even more dangerous dance awaited. The sound of the chisel in the quarry was replaced by the deep, percussive beat of labor on the ramp. Moving a 2.5-ton block of limestone was a symphony of coordinated force, a process governed by the fourth unspoken code, the rhythm of the ramp. This was not chaos but a carefully managed flow of men and stone. Teams of laborers, sometimes 20 or more, would haul on thick ropes attached to a wooden sledge. Their power had to be perfectly synchronized. A single person pulling out of sequence could cause the sledge to jerk, dig into the ramp's surface, and halt the entire procession. The rhythm was everything. A lead worker, perhaps using a simple drum or just the power of his own voice, would set the cadence. His chants were not songs, but commands disguised as melody. Heave, rest, heave, rest. Each call was a signal for a unified surge of effort, a collective exhalation of muscle that shifted the massive weight forward another few inches. The rhythm was alive, it adapted to the conditions. On the gentle slopes at the pyramid's base, the pace might be steady and relentless, but as the ramp coiled its way upward, the incline growing steeper with each passing week, the rhythm transformed. It became slower, more deliberate, each heave more powerful and sustained. The chant would deepen, the pauses between pulls would grow longer, allowing the men to gather their strength for the greater exertion. This was the collective heartbeat of the entire operation, a pulse that thrummed through the very stones of the structure. It turned an impossible physical task into a manageable, rhythmic ritual. This steady, rhythmic procession could only function because of the specialists who moved within it, the guardians of the path who ensured the rhythm never, ever faltered. The relentless sun beat down on the ramp, turning stone and sand into a furnace. In this environment, a sip of water was not a mere comfort. It was the thin line between a functioning builder and a fallen one. This reality gave birth to the fifth unspoken code, the Water-Bearers Vow. These men were not hauling stone but life itself. Their duty was a sacred, silent promise. They formed a human chain, a relay stretching from the life-giving Nile or from deep, cool cisterns dug near the site. Their tools were simple, clay pots and animal skins, but their cargo was priceless. Their entire purpose was to ensure a continuous, timely supply of fresh water to every single work crew, no matter how high on the pyramid they labored. A delayed water-bearer meant weakened muscles, dizziness, and a break in the crucial rhythm of the haul. His timely arrival was a signal understood by all, a reaffirmation that the state and the community valued their strength and their survival. It was a recognition that the pyramid was not built from stone alone, but from the sweat and well-being of the people. This fundamental act of support wove a web of deep interdependence across the entire project. The haulers depended on the water-bearers, who depended on the pot makers, who depended on the farmers who grew the grain that fed everyone. It was a society built on a chain of unspoken vows, where every role, no matter how seemingly small, was essential. The trust placed in the water-bearer was absolute, a shared responsibility for the collective lifeblood of the endeavor. This network of silent support extended far beyond water, creating an entire hidden economy beneath the stones, a world of barter and informal exchange that kept the human machine running smoothly. High on the rising tiers of stone, a different kind of language was being permanently etched into the monument. This was the sixth code, the mason's mark of honor. Every crew of stonecutters had their own unique symbol, a simple geometric design or a stylized animal they would carve into the side of each block they finished. You can still find these marks inside the pyramids today. They were not signatures of individual ego, but something far deeper. They were badges of collective identity and absolute accountability. If a block cracked during transport, or if its fit was imperfect and caused a delay, that mark would identify the crew responsible. This created a powerful, silent system of peer-enforced quality control. A flawed block was not just a mistake, it was a public reflection on the entire crew's skill and honor. Their reputation was literally set in stone. This system transformed labor into a legacy. To see your crew's symbol, your mark, ascending the ramp and disappearing into the eternal structure was a profound source of pride. It was a permanent testament, a message to the gods and to future generations that they were here, that their hands had built this. Their contribution was now part of eternity itself. This deep sense of personal ownership, however, existed within a framework that demanded absolute fairness for the collective. The scent of baking bread and fermenting beer permeated the workers' village, a daily promise of sustenance and stability. This was the seventh unspoken code, the bread and onion accord. In a civilization where the pharaoh was the ultimate provider, the principle of fair rationing was a cornerstone of social peace. Every individual, whether they were a master mason carving perfect joints or a laborer hauling sand, received the same fundamental daily allotment, a trio of life-giving staples: bread, beer, and onions. This was not a mere calorie count, it was a powerful, tangible symbol. The bakers working in vast, communal mud ovens and the brewers fermenting vats of grain understood their profound, unspoken duty. Theirs was a sacred trust to distribute these rations with absolute equity. A chief architect might have a larger house, but at the end of the day, he broke the same rough, nourishing bread as the man who sharpened his copper chisels. This daily ritual was a constant reaffirmation that every single role, no matter how seemingly humble, was a vital thread in the grand tapestry of the project. The sandal maker who repaired footwear and the scribe who recorded supplies were as essential as the quarryman, for a single blister or a lost inventory tally could disrupt the entire intricate machine. This consistent fairness, this daily proof of shared purpose, did more than fill bellies. It forged an unbreakable chain of communal loyalty, a deep-seated belief that they were all in this together, building not just for a king, but for each other and for the gods they served. Yet this profound sense of fairness and shared purpose required a spiritual anchor. High above the workers' village, the pyramid ascended as a machine for a king's rebirth, but on the ground, the hearts of the artisans beat for a different patron. This was the eighth unspoken code, the shared veneration of Ptah. While the official state religion focused on the sun god Ra and the divine pharaoh, the builders themselves held a quiet, collective reverence for Ptah, the god of craftsmen, architects, and all who created with their hands. Archaeological digs have uncovered small, personal amulets carved in his likeness and makeshift shrines tucked away in the worker settlements. This was not a grand, public worship, but a private, deeply felt devotion. It created a powerful spiritual bond among the artisans, a silent understanding that their skill was not merely learned, but was a divine gift from Ptah himself. Their ability to read the grain of stone, to achieve a seamless joint, to visualize a structure in their mind before it existed, all of this was seen as a sacred inspiration. This shared faith provided a common spiritual framework that transcended the individual crews and their masons' marks. It united the quarryman, the mason, and the sculptor in a purpose that was both royal and profoundly personal. They were not just state laborers, they were the earthly hands of the divine craftsman, and their work was a form of prayer. This spiritual unity, however, had to survive the pressures of the real world, where tempers could flare under the desert sun over a misplaced tool or a disputed measurement. A formal halt for a shouting match would break the sacred rhythm of the work, so a parallel, practical system evolved to manage human friction without ever stopping the machine, a silent code of justice that kept the peace. A hot-tempered argument over a misplaced copper chisel could halt work for a dozen men. In such a pressurized environment, the ninth unspoken code, the Elders Mediation, was essential for survival. The official overseers with their whips and scrolls existed to manage logistics and output, but they were not the first resort for the daily frictions of life. Instead, a powerful, informal justice system operated within the crews themselves. When a dispute arose, whether over tools, rations, or perceived laziness, the involved parties would quietly seek out a respected elder. This was not an official judge, but a senior foreman or a mason whose decades of experience had earned him universal respect. His authority came not from a title, but from the collective trust of his community. The goal of his mediation was never to assign blame and punishment in the way a state official might. It was something far more profound, restorative justice. The elder would listen carefully to both sides, often in the shade after the day's work was done. He sought a solution that would mend the torn social fabric. Perhaps the resolution was a simple public apology. Maybe it involved the offending party taking on an extra, undesirable task for a week, or sharing a portion of their beer ration. The solution was always designed to rebalance the scales and allow both men to return to work the next day without simmering resentment. This system prevented countless small conflicts from escalating into feuds that could cripple a team's efficiency. It reinforced the powerful, unspoken idea that they were a self-regulating community, capable of governing their own affairs for the sake of the greater project. This delicate social harmony, however, was built upon a foundation that everyone understood and accepted, a clear and unspoken ladder of skill. The silence of the apprentice was a form of listening more profound than any spoken lesson. This was the 10th code, the apprentice's silence. A young man arriving at the worksite for the first time understood his place was not to ask why, but to watch how. His education was visual, tactile, and utterly silent. He would stand for hours observing the precise angle at which a master mason held his dolerite pounder, the subtle wrist flick that cleared stone dust without marring the surface, the way an experienced eye judged a seam by the light reflecting off its edge. To interrupt this focus with a question was not just disrespectful, it was a disruption to the sacred flow of work. The complex, unwritten science of ramp engineering, of calculating slopes and managing counterweights, could not be captured in a simple explanation. It had to be absorbed through years of patient observation, through seeing how the masters reacted when a sledge bogged down in the sand, or how they adjusted the rhythm when the incline grew steep. This silent apprenticeship was a vow of trust, a belief that the generations before them had perfected these methods for a reason. The master, in turn, understood his own unspoken duty to perform his craft with transparent, repeatable precision, creating a living library of technique for the watching eyes. This reverence for hard-won skill extended directly to the objects that made such skill possible, the very extensions of their own hands. A copper chisel was not merely a tool, it was a fragment of the pyramid's potential. In a society without iron, copper was a scarce and vital resource, painstakingly smelted and shaped. This reality forged the 11th unspoken code, the tool keeper's trust. The men and women who managed the central tool sheds held one of the most critical roles on the entire plateau. Their domain was a carefully organized arsenal of chisels, dolerite pounders, and measuring cords made of stretched leather. Each item was a key that unlocked the labor of others, and the keeper's duty was a sacred vow of stewardship. Tools were not carelessly tossed into a pile. At the end of each day, they were collected, inspected, and meticulously maintained. Blunted copper chisels were sent for re-sharpening, a process that slowly consumed the precious metal until it was too small to hold. Worn measuring cords were checked against a master standard to ensure the sacred geometry of the project never wavered. The issuance of these items each morning was a ritual of mutual understanding, not bureaucracy. A worker would approach, and the keeper would hand him the correct tools based on his crew's task for the day, a system running on memory and recognition. There were no signed papyrus receipts. The entire process was built on a foundation of absolute, unspoken trust. For a worker to lose a chisel or to break a hammer through carelessness was a profound violation. It was not the loss of the object itself that was the true crime, but the betrayal of the keeper's trust and the direct hindrance of every other builder who depended on that tool to fulfill their own vow. This meticulous, reverent care for physical resources was mirrored by an even deeper commitment to the most valuable asset of all, the human body that wielded them. A broken bone could have been a death sentence in the ancient world, yet on the Giza Plateau it was not. The 12th unspoken code, the healer's oath, transformed a potential tragedy into a manageable event. Excavations of the worker cemeteries provide silent, powerful testimony to this principle. Skeletons have been found with fractured limbs that were expertly set and had healed perfectly, proving the injured person was cared for over many months until they could work again. Other remains show evidence of successful amputations and even trepanation, the delicate drilling of a hole in the skull, likely to relieve pressure from a head injury. These were not crude attempts at medicine. They were sophisticated interventions performed by individuals with deep, practical knowledge of the human body. These healers, whether priests of Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of healing, or simply experienced elders, operated under a profound, unwritten vow. Their duty was to treat any injured worker who came to them, whether he was a high-status sculptor or a lowly laborer hauling mud bricks. There were no questions of payment or rank, only the immediate need to mend what was broken. This system created an invisible safety net that stretched across the entire community. A builder could take the calculated risk of maneuvering a heavy block, knowing that if the weight shifted and crushed his arm, he would not be cast aside. He would be carried to the healer's tent, his bone would be set with linen bandages and wooden splints, and he would be fed and sheltered throughout his long recovery. This assurance was a form of social glue as strong as any mortar. It signaled a fundamental truth that every pair of hands was valued, and the community would not abandon its own in a moment of vulnerability. This deep-seated security, this promise of care, empowered individuals to perform with a courage and dedication that would otherwise be unimaginable. And just as the community cared for the body, it also nourished the spirit through a system of shared celebration. The strength of a single rope was the only barrier between control and calamity. This was the 13th code, the rope maker's pledge. In an age before steel cables, the primary tether for every multi-ton block was a thick, hand-woven cord of papyrus or flax. The men and women who crafted these ropes were not distant suppliers. They were integral to the project's safety, bound by a silent, terrifying knowledge. A single frayed strand, a poorly twisted section, or a hidden weak spot could snap under the immense strain. The result would be instantaneous, a block breaking free on a steep ramp, transforming into an unstoppable avalanche of stone that would crush everything in its path. This was not a theoretical risk, it was a daily specter that haunted the ramps. The rope makers, therefore, worked with a reverence that bordered on the sacred. Their hands moved with practiced, rhythmic certainty, twisting and weaving each fiber into a unified whole of incredible tensile strength. They tested their own work, not with machines, but with the collective weight of their team, feeling for any give, any ominous creak that signaled imperfection. Their pledge was one of absolute integrity, a quiet vow that their contribution, though unseen once the ropes were coated in dust and sweat, was literally holding the entire enterprise together. It was this profound, earned trust in their materials that unlocked one of the most daring engineering feats of the entire project, the placement of the pyramid's crowning glory. A single, subtle dip of the lead hauler's shoulder was all it took. This was the 14th code, the sled crew's unspoken signal. On the crowded, noisy ramp, shouted commands were useless, lost in the groaning of wood, the hiss of sand, and the collective breathing of 100 men. The lead hauler, his back to the team and his eyes fixed on the path ahead, became a living conductor. His body was his instrument. A raised open palm held steady meant hold. A slow, deliberate forward sweep of the hand meant prepare to pull. A sharp, downward chop of the fist was the signal for the unified, explosive heave that moved the massive weight. His entire posture communicated the state of the journey, a slight lean to the left telling the team on that side to pull harder to correct the sledge's course. This silent language was born from brutal necessity. A misunderstood command, a single second of hesitation, could mean the sledge sliding sideways, jamming against the ramp's retaining wall, or worse, a rope snapping under uneven strain. The trust in this system was absolute. Every man on the rope learned to read the lead hauler's movements with peripheral vision, their muscles coiled and ready to translate a slight gesture into immediate, coordinated action. This was a masterpiece of non-verbal teamwork, a dance of immense power guided by the faintest of cues. Such flawless coordination was the only thing that made the final, most delicate maneuver possible, the moment the block left the ramp and met its permanent home. The final tap of a wooden mallet echoed with a soft, definitive thud. This was the 15th code, the final tap of placement, a sound that meant weeks of labor had reached their ultimate conclusion. When a limestone block finally arrived at its ordained position, the most junior workers would step back. The final act of setting was a privilege reserved only for the most senior, most experienced masons in the crew. His tool was not a heavy pounder but a lighter mallet, and his stroke was not one of force but of finesse. He would listen, his ear almost touching the stone, as he gave the block one specific, gentle tap. The sound it produced was the final test, a solid, resonant tone that confirmed the block was perfectly seated, its weight now transferred evenly into the body of the pyramid. The moment this sound faded, a brief, profound silence would fall over the immediate crew. It was a silent respect, an acknowledgement that a tiny piece of eternity had just been locked into place. This ritual was the ceremonial closing of a chapter that began in the quarry and traveled for miles, a journey of countless hands and unspoken signals, now complete. But this moment of perfect, silent precision was supported by a bustling, hidden world of informal exchange, an entire economy that operated in the shadows of the official ration system. A fresh-baked loaf of bread could be worth more than its weight in gold, or at least in sharpened copper. This was the 16th unspoken code, the barter system of favors, a shadow economy that ran parallel to the official rations. The state provided the basics, but life required more. A sandal maker, his own footwear worn thin, might mend a water-bearer's leaking skin in exchange for an extra share of fish from the next delivery. A scribe, skilled with numbers, might calculate a fair division of a crew's beer allotment in return for a promise of future help from their strong backs. This economy was not recorded on any papyrus scroll. It existed in memory, a complex and living ledger of debts and credits built entirely on personal honor. A man's word was his bond, and to renege on a barter agreement was to shatter that bond, damaging his reputation across the entire community. This intricate web of mutual obligation did more than just provide small comforts. It wove a dense fabric of interdependence that strengthened the entire social structure. It meant that a problem for one person became a shared concern for many, because so many were connected through this chain of favors. This fluid exchange of goods naturally extended to something even more valuable, the silent trade of hard-won skill. A mason might share a trick for dressing a difficult type of stone with a sculptor, not for payment, but because he knew that one day he might need the sculptor's keen eye to judge an ornamental detail. This cross-pollination of knowledge, this willingness to teach and learn across rigid craft boundaries, was the system's greatest hidden benefit, ensuring that the collective intelligence of the entire workforce continued to grow. A master mason could glance at a ramp and understand its hidden stresses. This was the 17th code, the cross-training understanding. While every builder was a specialist, a deep and unspoken agreement ensured that the walls between their trades were porous. A man who spent his days hauling stone on sledges would, over years, absorb the fundamental principles of how those ramps were engineered. He would learn to read the subtle compression of the sand and clay underfoot, sensing when an incline was becoming unstable. Similarly, a mason shaping a block in the upper courses would inherently grasp the immense effort required to bring it to him, understanding the hauler's rhythm and the critical importance of his own precision in not wasting that effort. This shared foundational knowledge was the project's secret resilience. If a skilled quarryman who could read the subtle faults in a rock face fell ill, a senior member of his crew, who had absorbed the knowledge through years of proximity, could step into his role without the entire supply of stone faltering. This flexibility was a hidden asset in a project that spanned generations, allowing it to absorb the shock of illness, injury, and the simple passage of time. This collective intelligence, this shared mental map of the entire operation, meant the pyramid was not just being built by thousands of hands, but by one interconnected mind. This deep well of shared experience became the only true defense against the project's greatest and most unpredictable adversary, the desert itself, which could unleash chaos with a single, sudden storm. A block of limestone could hold a secret until the final moment of dressing. Despite the quarryman's skill, a hidden fracture might appear under the mason's chisel, a fine, hairline crack that rendered the stone useless for its intended purpose. This moment of discovery was a critical test of the entire system's character. The 18th code, the protocol for the flawed block, governed this exact situation. The response was not one of anger or public shaming. There was no search for someone to blame. Instead, a swift, silent decision was made. The flawed block was simply marked with a different symbol and quietly moved aside. It was not waste, it was a resource in a different form. Perhaps it would be used deep within the pyramid's core, where structural perfection was less critical, or it might be deliberately broken into smaller pieces to serve as rubble fill for the ramps themselves. This was a philosophy of radical pragmatism. Every piece of stone represented immense labor, from its extraction to its transport. To discard it completely would be an insult to that effort. This code ensured that nothing was truly lost, only transformed. It was a collective agreement to solve problems, not punish people, a recognition that perfection was the goal, but intelligent adaptation was the path. This same pragmatic mindset scaled all the way up to the project's greatest challenge, where a single miscalculation could doom the entire geometry of the monument. The silence of the night was a different kind of labor. As the sun vanished and the desert cooled, a new shift took its post, governed by the 19th unspoken code, the Night Watch's Vigil. Their duty was a promise made in the dark, a vow of unwavering guardianship over the dormant worksite. While the day crews slept deeply in their villages, these men paced silent patrols through the monochrome world of moonlight and shadow. Their eyes, adjusted to the gloom, scanned for any sign of movement, not from human intruders, but from the scavengers of the desert, hyenas or wild dogs that might dig at storage areas or foul the water supplies. More critically, they were the sentinels against the slow, invisible threats that emerged after hours. They listened for the faint, unsettling trickle of sand that might signal a ramp edge beginning to crumble. They watched for ropes left under tension, checking for any new fraying that could spell disaster at the first pull of the morning. Their presence was a blanket of security thrown over the entire plateau, ensuring that the immense effort of yesterday would be perfectly intact for the work of tomorrow. This allowed every laborer and artisan to close their eyes without a single anxious thought about the site, their rest as deep and restorative as the silence they left behind. This sacred cycle of strenuous day and guarded night was the steady heartbeat of the decades-long project, a rhythm as essential as the beat of the hauler's chant. The steady rhythm of labor was not a prison sentence, but a dance with a sacred partner, the calendar itself. This was the 20th unspoken code, the sanctity of rest days. The state's ambition was boundless, but its wisdom was rooted in the cycles of the Nile and the stars. On specific festival days dedicated to the gods, or during holy periods tied to the agricultural year, the rhythmic chant on the ramps would fall silent. The sledges rested, the chisels lay still. This was a profound, unwritten agreement between the project's overseers and the thousands of workers. It was a mutual recognition that the human spirit and body were not inexhaustible resources. These mandated pauses were not viewed as lost productivity, but as a crucial investment in the long-term health of the entire endeavor. A workforce pushed to the brink of exhaustion would make more mistakes, suffer more injuries, and lose the very morale that made the impossible seem achievable. These days of rest provided essential physical recovery for aching muscles and broken blisters, but they offered something even more vital, spiritual and social renewal. It was a time for families in the worker villages to reconnect, for communal feasts to be shared, and for individuals to remember the world beyond the rising stone. This respect for cyclical renewal was a direct mirror of the world they inhabited, a land defined by the Nile's own cycle of flood, growth, and harvest. Just as the land needed to lie fallow to remain fertile, so too did the builders. This wisdom ensured that when work resumed, it was undertaken with refreshed vigor and a reaffirmed sense of purpose. This deep understanding of human limits, however, stood in stark contrast to the absolute, unforgiving demands of the project's final and most terrifying trial. The crackle of the evening fire was a welcome sound, a signal that the day's brutal labor was over. In the flickering light of the worker villages, a different kind of essential work began, governed by the 21st unspoken code, the storyteller's role. These men and women were not builders of stone, but architects of the spirit. Their voices rose and fell, weaving tales that did more than just entertain. They mended frayed nerves and fortified weary hearts. They recounted the epic struggles of the gods, stories of Osiris and Isis that mirrored their own cycles of death and rebirth. They spoke of the legendary pharaohs who had united the two lands, framing their own labor as a continuation of that grand national destiny. But their most potent tales were often the simplest, the funny mishaps from the worksite, the story of the apprentice who accidentally sent a basket of tools sliding down a ramp, or the time a stubborn donkey held up an entire procession. These anecdotes transformed shared frustrations into collective laughter, a psychological release valve for the immense pressure they all endured. The storyteller was the community's unofficial historian and psychologist, his narratives reinforcing the very values that held their world together: loyalty, perseverance, and the dignity of their shared task. This oral tradition processed the raw experience of the monumental project, turning individual struggle into a shared, meaningful saga. It reminded every listener that they were part of a story far greater than themselves, a narrative that would, like the pyramid, long outlast them. This nightly ritual of shared stories forged a cultural identity strong enough to bind together people from different villages and backgrounds, uniting them not just as a workforce, but as a people. And just as these stories looked back to the past and inward to their own community, another code compelled them to look forward, to the generations who would one day take their place. Deep within the pyramid's core, far from any ceremonial chamber, a stone bears the rough charcoal sketch of a boat and the name, the Friends of Khufu Gang. This was not an act of defiance, but the 22nd code, the Graffiti of Camaraderie. In the most hidden, unfinished spaces, the builders left these personal marks, a quiet but powerful assertion of self. After years of labor governed by the silent codes of precision and coordination, these scrolls were a release, a whispered conversation across the centuries. They were proof that within the overwhelming, God-like scale of the project, the individual human spirit had not been extinguished. a man who spent his life ensuring joints were seamless would, in a dark and unseen corner, carve a clumsy depiction of his favorite hunting dog. Another would simply write his name next to his crew's symbol, not for official credit, but for the simple, profound need to say, "I existed, I was part of this." This graffiti was the ultimate humanization of the stone mountain, transforming it from a monument to a pharaoh into a tapestry woven with thousands of tiny, personal threads. It was the final, unspoken confirmation that their loyalty was not just to the king or the gods, but to each other, a bond of shared experience etched into the very bones of their creation. This deep, personal connection to their work created a legacy that was meant to endure, but it was a legacy that demanded one final, profound sacrifice from the entire community. The hands that once hauled multi-ton blocks of stone now stirred a vast pot of fish stew in the communal kitchen. This was the 23rd code, the Unwritten Pension, a profound social contract that honored a lifetime of labor. When a builder's body finally surrendered to age or a permanent injury, the community did not cast him aside. His value was not merely in his muscle, but in the decades of hard-won experience he carried in his mind. The system found a new place for him, a role that respected his limitations while leveraging his wisdom. He might become a night watchman, his sharp eyes still valuable even if his back was not. He could be tasked with guarding the precious copper tools, or with patiently teaching wide-eyed apprentices how to properly mix the sand slurry for polishing stone. This was not charity, it was a return on an investment of a lifetime. It was a silent promise made manifest that if you gave your strength to the mountain would provide for you until your last day. This long-term perspective was the emotional bedrock of a project that spanned generations. A young man hauling stone in the burning sun could look at the elder mending ropes in the shade and see his own future secure and respected. This assurance transformed labor from a desperate struggle for survival into a dignified career with a guaranteed, honorable conclusion. It fostered a loyalty so deep it became a form of patriotism, binding the workforce to the project with bonds of gratitude and mutual care. This intricate web of social support, however, was all that stood between order and chaos when the desert itself unleashed its fury without warning. The true heart of the pyramid was not its towering peak, but the darkness held within its core. The teams who carved the internal passages and chambers worked under the 24th unspoken code, the vow of the Inner Sanctum. This was a pledge of absolute secrecy that went far beyond simple security. For these select artisans and engineers, the precise angles of the ascending corridors, the hidden triggers for the massive granite portcullis slabs, and the sacred location of the king's burial chamber were not just architectural details, they were divine mysteries. To speak of these things casually would be to profane the pharaoh's perilous journey to the afterlife, a betrayal of the gods themselves and the spiritual core of their entire civilization. This knowledge was a sacred burden, shared only through silent demonstration and trusted lineage. A master would show his most loyal apprentice how to set a blocking stone so it appeared to be part of the wall, his hands communicating what words could not. The ultimate expression of their loyalty was this self-imposed silence, a collective agreement to carry the pyramid's deepest secrets to their own graves. This profound, shared burden forged an unbreakable bond among those who worked in the echoing stillness of the interior, a final, silent covenant that protected the soul of the mountain they had built. The pyramid's final, silent agreement was the surrender of the self. This was the 25th code, the legacy of the anonymous master. Across decades of labor, the identities of the brilliant minds who calculated the perfect angles, the master masons who perfected the seamless joint, and the countless hands that guided each block into place were deliberately absorbed into the whole. The pharaoh's name was carved for eternity, but theirs were whispered only in the worker villages, then forgotten by time. They built under a profound, collective understanding that their glory was not in personal fame, but in the indestructible perfection of the work itself. To seek individual recognition would have been to fracture the very unity that made the project possible. The true masterpiece was not the pyramid alone, but the invisible society that built it, a society held together by 24 other unspoken rules. The final code was the capstone that locked all the others into place, a conscious choice to let their achievement be their only signature. That mountain of stone, standing unshaken for 4,000 years, is their collective name. It is the ultimate testament to what humanity can accomplish not through force, but through shared purpose, unbreakable discipline, and the quiet, sacred bonds forged in the shadow of eternity. This was a society that refused to see a boundary between the work and the worker. Engineering, loyalty, and daily life were not separate departments, but three strands of a single, unbreakable rope. The flawless seam of a limestone block was a direct product of the fair ration of bread that fueled the mason's arm, the healer's promise that mended it when it broke, and the elder's quiet justice that resolved the dispute over a tool without breaking the crew's spirit. You cannot command this level of perfection through force alone. It must be cultivated. The silent language of the quarry and the rhythmic chant on the ramp were only possible because of the barter system that mended sandals and the storyteller who mended morale each night around the fire. This was a holistic system, a single, living organism. The pyramid, therefore, is not merely a tomb of stone. It is the physical manifestation of an entire social contract, a frozen moment of profound collaboration. It challenges our modern compartmentalization, where engineering is one building, human resources is another, and the worker's inner life is left at the gate. For the builders, these worlds were one and the same. The monument's true genius lies not in the weight it carries, but in the weight it shares, distributing the burden across a society engineered for mutual support. The silent whispers of the pyramid builders have echoed for millennia, not in words, but in the enduring stone itself. These 25 unspoken codes reveal a truth far more profound than how they built, but why they succeeded against impossible odds. They built with more than copper chisels and limestone. They built with an unshakable foundation of trust, a shared sense of purpose, and a deep, mutual respect that transformed a massive workforce into a single, cohesive organism. This was a society where the Water-Bearers Vow was as critical as the Mason's mark, where the Elders Mediation preserved the harmony that the seamless joint required. The pyramid is the physical proof of what humans can achieve when their social architecture is as perfectly engineered as their stone one. The next time you see an image of those majestic structures, remember the invisible world beneath the stones, the intricate web of loyalty and life that made eternity possible. What unspoken codes of conduct, what silent agreements of mutual support govern your own community or workplace? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this glimpse into the human heart of history resonated with you, subscribe for more journeys into the past.